on the news, we hear of typhoons, flooding, earthquakes, wars, and all the events in this world that inflict pain on us humanity. And reality is, it doesn't get better, right? Pain and suffering around us are increased as this world age.
And I believe there are two kinds of people. There are people who just watch like spectators and see the suffering of those people around them.
And on the other hand, there are many people who want to get involved to help the people in need.
And that is the reason why we are here today, and it's because we want to invite you to be involved in a work of serving humanity. And not just that, we are going to discuss also on how you can be actually involved and learn about practical things that you can do to uphold justice, compassion, and love. That's why stay tuned only here on
Adra TV.
Hello everyone, we would like to welcome you to Adra TV's episodes on the Disaster Ready Church. Again, Adra stands for Adventist Development and Relief Agency, and this is a development and humanitarian arm of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This is a very special program, the Disaster Ready Church. This is designed to be training for churches on being disaster ready. But let me also say that this is not only for churches. This process, everybody, or this journey that we will take together is relevant also to other faiths or organizations. So please, everyone that's listening right now, follow the entire program because this series is done in collaboration between Adra Philippines, Adra Asia Regional Office, and Adra Australia. And we are really blessed to have 3 representatives from these offices who will discuss and share details of the program with you. Now, we encourage everyone to follow all of these episodes that we're going to have because this is, as we've said, a journey of making your church or your place of worship ready to respond during a disaster and to be a blessing to those around you, to be a church where the mission of Jesus is alive. But before we proceed, we would like to introduce ourselves, no? My name is Chantel, the marketing officer of Adra Philippines.
Hi everyone, I'm Shaina, leading emergencies and have been responding to different disasters in the Philippines.
Hi, I'm KJ. I work with the Adra team in Australia, and we are training churches, helping them to make plans for what they could do to help their community when disasters strike in Australia.
Hi, and I am Prabhuk Bandarathilaka. I am the Regional Humanitarian Response Coordinator for Adra Asia. And I'm here to support all our officers, Adra officers in Asia, to be better prepared and to respond better.
Okay, so everybody, we are from Adra Australia, KJ, Prabhuk from Adra Asia, but you're originally from?
Sri Lanka.
You're from Sri Lanka.
Yes.
And we also have Shaina. So both of us are from Adra Philippines. Now that we know each other, for the next few episodes, we'll be together. These are the faces that you'll have to see. And now, since we know everybody, let me make ask a very important and vital question to Prabhuk. No? I think this is also, I would like to represent also those that are watching right now. What are we trying to achieve through this program?
Thank you, Chantel, for that important question. And our viewers may be having the same question, right? And it's very important to get the objectives defined very clearly. Simply put, this whole series of episodes is meant to be and meant to provide a step-by-step guide for churches or faith groups, faith-based organizations to be ready to respond to disasters. Actually, the Disaster Ready Church program actually was launched in Australia, and we are happy that KJ was able to fly in and join us here in the studio in the Philippines. KJ, do you want to explain a little bit about how this all came about?
Yeah, sure. About 4 or 5 years ago, there was a pilot program of the Disaster Ready Church in Vanuatu and in the Solomons. And because of it being useful there. There was a proposal that came out of the South Pacific Division, and now there are a number of countries, including Australia, Indonesia, Fiji, Samoa, New Zealand, and also the Philippines, who are doing Disaster Ready Church. And Shayna, tell us what's been going on in the Philippines in this program.
Yeah, actually here in the Philippines, we have done episodes on Adra TV about Disaster Ready Church on our own dialect, the Cebuano language. And we have just finished our Disaster Ready Church training of trainers to 3 unions, the NPUC, CPUC, and SPUC, with representatives from different missions and conferences.
Yeah, so aside that, I'd just like to give a quick background. Like Shaina mentioned about the trainings, but also we're doing this TV program for almost a year already on Disaster Ready Church. So it's so very interesting how in different countries, in different areas in the world, these things are falling into place even when things are not as planned as they should be. I really remember when Sir Prabhu came to the Philippines. He came here to the southern Philippines, Mindanao, and I was so shocked when you remember that part when you said, how about we talk about being disaster ready on TV? And then all of a sudden we flew, and then we're really busy with the Disaster Ready Churches training. I know also, like, as a testimony, that we've had an increase of viewership on Adra TV here in the Philippines. And we have been receiving a lot of feedback appreciating the sessions we've done in our dialect, which is Cebuano. But now, just like to ask again Prabhu another question. Everybody, why be disaster ready?
So this is not about just being disaster ready in general, but this is targeted at supporting churches and other religious places, faith groups, in being disaster ready, right? So it's important to understand that distinction, because when a disaster happens, it's really common all around the world that people would run first towards the place of worship, because they find a sense of refuge there. It is a place of worship. People are accustomed to go to that place on a weekly or even daily basis sometimes, so they run towards their place of worship. And it's important for the places of worship to be ready to accept these people, right? Then also people go back to their faith leaders to try to rationalize what's going on, right? To understand why this actually happened to us. And faith leaders, faith groups, churches need to be prepared to respond in times like that. There's also a practical dimension to this, Chantel, and I'm sure it's the same in Australia and everywhere else. Faith groups actually own a lot of assets all around the world. And all of these assets that they own could be mobilized in a time of disaster to help the people in need.
Just like all aspects of life, you need to put an effort to being a disaster ready if you want to respond during a disaster. That is why this training is very important, since it provides a guide on what to do in being a disaster ready.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's really important to be prepared ahead of time for disasters that are coming, even if it's a bit of effort. And we want people to be able to reach out to Adra to help them in getting prepared with training and support when things happen.
Moreover, I think I want to just add one more point, Chantal. You know, faith-based organizations have a moral responsibility towards their community, to be there for them during the time of need, right? And I want to bring our discussion into this term that we use broadly called the acts of God. And if you remember, in our series that we ran for the Philippines, specific to the Philippines, we spoke a little bit about the acts of God and how it's actually defined as disasters in the legal context, especially when it comes to insurance. However, this is not how we perceive acts of God, right? So, KJ, do you want to elaborate a little bit more on this?
Yeah, you're touching on a really big topic.
Yeah, I know.
You know, what is an act of God? And when bad things happen, and we know disasters do happen, people often ask that question, you know, was this something that God did? You know, where was God when this happened? And, you know, why is there so much suffering in the world? And yeah, it's a hard question to answer. And In the Bible, there are stories of disasters. Some of them are attributed to God, like Noah's flood or the plagues on Egypt, where he gave warnings that weren't heeded and then there was a disaster. But there's also a lot of other stories where they weren't attributed to God. You know, there were many famines in the story of Joseph, in the story of Ruth and Naomi, Abraham, that weren't attributed to God. So you can't say that the Bible supports the idea that all disasters are from God. The rain comes on the just and the unjust, right? Bad things happen to good people and you know, vice versa. So look, it's a really hard question, and sometimes the Bible doesn't give us clear answers. It's a question that's worth talking about with your churches. There are likely going to be people who are asking this very question, especially if they've experienced tragedy or loss because of a disaster. But we think that acts of God are acts of love. The Bible promises us that God will be with us through those times and shows us what God is like, and he is a loving God. He is compassionate. So I would say an act of God is an act of love.
Yes, that's right, KJ. Acts of love are acts of God and not death and destruction. Actually, here in the Philippines, we face so many disasters, and the Adra, in partnership with the church, has been able to really share our love with those victims.
Yes, and I would just like to add on that acts of God. I mean, it's very evident also in the New Testament when Jesus was here. He represented God. He wanted to make sure the way he talked to people every action that he had was like an act of God, being there, healing, preaching, teaching, but he was more on relieving those who are suffering around him. And I think that is an image of what acts of God really is. Compared to, I hear a lot of community members, sometimes they say, oh, maybe this calamity or this disaster happened to us or something bad happened to us because we have sinned or we have done this and God is punishing us and all. And I believe that's why like insurance companies put it there, that it's because of God. But yes, Jesus has cleared that out. The acts of God are acts of love. And that's what we want to really point out to our viewers who's listening right now. And if you want to discuss that in your churches, that's a very powerful discussion. Youth groups, like AY afternoons, just sit down and ask ourselves, what are acts of God? Okay, so to confirm if what we're saying here actually is really true. So let's get right into this. We have discussed about the acts of love, but the next question would be, Prabhu, what are the steps then?
Right. So I would actually say, Chantal, and Shaina and KJ, I think you'll agree with me because it's also in the script. It's important for faith groups and churches, youth, as you mentioned, to sit and first have that discussion, right? To clear the air and then say, this is our true motivation to be disaster ready, right? It's not a mechanical thing. It's not just a technical thing. It's something that you do with your whole heart, right? So you need to be in it completely to say, yes, we want to do this. We want to be ready. This is our responsibility, right? To show God's love. And it could be different for other faiths. It could be a different motivation. However, it's important to still have that discussion. So we encourage our viewers to join with their faith groups if you are a faith lead and facilitate this discussion amongst your group. But let's move on to Shaina and ask Shaina about the Disaster Ready Church program as a whole here in the Philippines, right?
Correct. Once we understand some key terms and concepts, we then move into just 4 steps that a church or faith group can do to be prepared to respond in times of a disaster or being a disaster ready. There are actually 4 basic steps: my church, my community, my team, and my response.
Okay, so just 4.
Yeah.
So what was it again? My church, my community, my team, and my response.
response.
But Prabhuk is lagging down. You have to join the,
Sorry,
the energy. We
Yeah.
have to.
Okay, let's try it again.
Let's try it
This
again.
time I will be intentional.
Yeah. 4 steps to a disaster-ready church. My church, my community, my team, and my response.
I like that. 4 steps, 4 ways that we can think about what we're doing to help us get ready as a church to respond to disasters.
Okay. And also, I mean, we're starting with definitions and terminologies. One most important word here, everybody that's watching, is the word disaster. So, Shaina, can you tell us what is a disaster?
There is actually a disaster formula, and it goes like this: hazard plus vulnerability equals disaster.
Okay, so let's all repeat that again. Hazard plus vulnerability equals disaster. So let's break it down and understand this formula a bit better. So what is a hazard, KJ?
A hazard simply is something that has the potential to cause harm. So, for example, in the room where we are, we have cameras. Thank you for the team that's doing it here. And there are some electrical cords running to those cameras. So there's a hazard in that there's the potential that someone could trip over and hurt themselves on those cords. Now, where you're sitting, you're some distance from the cords. We're quite safe, here. But if you were to move your location closer to where those cords are, you might be more vulnerable. So the first word was hazard plus vulnerability. So that word vulnerability then is how likely you are to be affected and harmed by that hazard. So, for example, like if you moved closer, but also if, for example, you were elderly in your 80s or 90s, then if you tripped and fell, you would hurt yourself likely more severely. So you would be more vulnerable to that hazard.
Yes, and in the context of the community, these hazards could be natural or man-made.
Oh, so that is a broad categorization. Natural and man-made. Shaina, would you like to elaborate more on what natural and man-made hazards are?
Yes, man-made hazards could be human conflict, nuclear explosions, industrial accidents, any hazards that is made by humans. And natural hazards are volcanoes, earthquakes, flood, landslide, typhoons, the usual hazards that we experience here in the Philippines. So when we couple the hazard with the vulnerability, we have a disaster which is a loss of life and property. And this is the simplest way to understand disaster.
Okay, let me complicate it a little bit more because I think this is what I am paid to do. Right? So when you look at disasters, you can further categorize disasters broadly into 2 areas. And we call them slow onset and rapid onset disasters, right? So the slow onset disasters take time to develop and rapid onset disasters happen in an instant. KJ, do you want to elaborate a little bit on the types of disasters that you have in Australia, for example?
Yeah, one example of a rapid onset disaster that we often come across in Australia are bushfires. It only takes a spark, they say, to get a fire going, and on a hot, windy summer's day in Australia, fires can spread very quickly and take people by surprise and be really destructive. Another example of disasters in Australia, one, for example, that's a slow onset, but still quite insidious, is drought. Day after day, there's no rain, and it can be so discouraging for the farmers who are struggling to put food on the table and their livelihoods are destroyed or threatened, and it just happens so slowly, Yeah, terrible.
Yeah, in the Philippines, we usually experience typhoons and have active volcanoes here that suddenly struck and immediately affects many people. While on the slow onset, we also experience drought, or we call it here El Nino.
Right. So there are some terms that we use in the humanitarian sector when it comes to this slow and rapid onset. We also use the words stressors and shocks. So shocks is something obviously that happens in a short period of time, and stresses happen over a period of time. So, and this is why it's very important for churches, organizations to be ready and not to waste time when it actually happens. Okay?
So just to recap and make it simpler for the viewers, let's try to look at this diagram that appears on your screen. You can see that rock on top of the mountain is the hazard, and the house is obviously vulnerable to that hazard. Now, if the rock rolls down and hits the house, it is then a disaster.
Oh, so that's very clear to all of our viewers that are watching right now. But I think it's good if we could discuss a bit more about vulnerabilities, since I feel we need to understand it a bit. I do understand on the hazards part, but how about the vulnerabilities? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are many things that can make you vulnerable, and please help me with examples if you think of them while I'm talking. Age is one that we mentioned before. You could be very young or very old. You might have a disability. You might be living a long way from your family, maybe as a migrant. There might be a language barrier that prevents you from getting the information that you need in that context when a disaster happens. So that might make you more vulnerable. Can you think of any others?
I also want to bring this dimension, KJ, on vulnerabilities that are stacked up on each other. So let me explain. Okay, going back to the example that you brought about Chantel tripping over the wires, and there's a lot of wires over there, right? So if Chantel walks over there and she trips and she falls because she's so acrobatic, she may do a flip and stand on her feet
so
like
impossible.
a cat. Right? But however, if she's in her 80s or 90s, she might end up with a fractured hip or a broken knee. It could be worse. So when we speak about vulnerabilities, it's not one-dimensional, right? And there's a term for this. There's a term called intersectionalities. I know it's a bit long, and our viewers could Google it. Intersectionalities. It basically describes how vulnerabilities are stacked up on each other. So let me elaborate a little bit more. So in Australia, if you have a female who is pregnant, she's vulnerable. Now, if she's without a job, she's more vulnerable. But if she also has a child who is below 5, another child, and she's a single mom, the vulnerability is more. What if she's a woman who is pregnant with a child below 5 and a refugee? The level of vulnerability increases, right? So it's very important to understand vulnerability in that specific context, because it's not the same.
Yeah, so there's many different reasons why you might be vulnerable, not just because of where you live, but also because of the factors that you're talking about. And this really is the reason why ADRA was created 40 years ago, was because the church wanted to express its concern for these people who may be vulnerable for whatever reason, whether they're poor, malnourished, whether they've been a victim of a natural or man-made disaster. The church wants to show God's love to those people through ADRA, for ADRA to lead the church in finding practical solutions, in making partnerships within and also outside of our church for the purpose of helping people who are often pushed aside and are in need. We want to show our Christian values to those people without ever using them as a criteria for giving aid.
Okay, I just and like on the opening spiel, we talked about there are two kinds of people in all of this suffering and all. There are those who watch, and there's other kind of individuals who do something about it. And I think that's the position that our church wants to take. That we want to not just watch and like say, oh, the world is going to end. And yes, we're going to go to heaven, and yeah, that's all. But I think the church wants to make sure that in times like this, we see the Lord most through the church. But before I do and proceed on that, I would just like to ask Sir Prabhu, how many years have you been working as ADRA Asia response, or working in ADRA in response and disasters?
So I've been in ADRA now for about 16 years, and maybe with Adra Asia for the last 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And seeing this, like the formula for hazard plus vulnerability and disasters in Asia, in the Asian context, the level of disasters or the amount of disasters, how did it impact you? How do you see the world now or life now in a different color?
Yes, I think it definitely impacts you personally. It broadens your view. You don't take things lightly. I also want to tell Chantel that every one of us have a different motivation here to do or be part of the Disaster Ready Church, right? So, being with Adra Asia, my motivation is to support country officers, the Adventist Church, and other faith groups to be disaster ready, but also to come back to Adra and maybe reach a level where in Asia, Adra officers become the best faith-based organization that responds. Not just to have it as something like a credential or that's something that, but for us to be so prepared together with the Seventh Adventist Church, where we are there on the ground as the first responders, and then we support the community so that we bring real meaningful support to the people.
And it all makes sense. You've mentioned that the moral obligation also, not just a moral obligation, but I believe we have the right reasons why we're in this. But it's not easy to be involved in a work like this. How about you, KJ, in Australia? How do you personally being involved with people who has just gone through disasters or events like this that's painful, that allows like people to suffer? How did it impact you, and why? And does it have a contribution why you're doing and why you're here in the Philippines doing this series with us?
Yeah, my background isn't in emergency management, but when I took this role, I could see the potential of working with people like this who share those values and really want to help people. And I wanted to learn from people who have more experience, like the team in the Philippines, where you have a lot of disasters. When we run workshops, we hear a lot of stories from people who have been through disasters, and yeah, it's heartbreaking. And but it's also a privilege to hear their stories and to know that through the workshops, there's hope that in the future these things won't happen the same way in those places because they'll be prepared.
Shaina, like the Philippines, KJ, and like I think Prabuk knows this already, the Philippines is number one at risk among 100 countries in the world, number one at risk when it comes to disaster risk. Like we're in a typhoon belt, and then we're also in the ring of fire, and you can testify on that. So how about you, Shaina, taking up this role and being involved in this work?
This program, Disaster Ready Church, is really a beautiful program that we can bring to local churches, especially here in the Philippines, since we are disaster-prone areas. And then since we have a strong partnership with the ACS and the church and the churches, this is a good way to help the churches equip them more with right process and give them the capacities they need to be more effective responders in the field during disasters.
Yes, and we get to learn also what the churches are doing, and it's a collaboration, of the things that we do and they do, and all for the purpose of making sure that we can be there when somebody is in need. And also as Bible-based Christians, we know that there's a prediction, and I believe even if without the Bible in context, this world is really having more disasters, right? And we already are seeing increase in frequency and intensity of disasters all around us. So it will not come to a point, suffering will not come or disasters will not come. And let's not involve ourselves. No, it will come It will increase in frequency and intensity also. That is why the SDA Church and other faith organizations, we have this unique opportunity to be prepared for the times to come so that we are a blessing in our community.
So this is why it is so important for churches to engage with the Disaster Ready Church program, since it brings a step-by-step approach in preparing to respond meaningfully.
And we are so excited that you will be with us, everybody that is watching right now, as we run through the steps. Only 4 steps, right? What were the steps again?
My church, my community, my team, and my response.
So for the next episodes, coming episodes, we will be touching those 4 steps, and we encourage you to watch all these episodes because they're connected. Okay, and also, we are inviting you to get in touch with the ADRA office in your country to partner in being a disaster-ready church. And yes, everybody, again, what's the 4 steps? We have to repeat this again and again.
My church.
Okay, 1, 2, ready, go.
My church, my community, my team, and my response.
Okay, we still have more time.
Yeah,
Care
so
would say.
maybe if we can let our viewers know what to expect next, right? So one thing that they could expect is that we will be more or less dressed the same, because we are shooting this at a stretch on the same day or within a week. So you cannot expect us to have different clothes on every different. So that apart from that,
That's a really good reminder.
so that they will, if not, people will think, hey, these guys have only one set of clothes. Okay? But I think in the next episode, you can expect us to talk about my church and my community. And it will basically cover how you as a church, as a faith-based organization, as a community of believers, no matter which faith you're from, could get together and assess your capacities. Okay, so in the next episode, we'll discuss about that. And we will also discuss about how you can assess the community where you live, to look at different capabilities that you can draw from your community, but at the same time to understand different vulnerabilities in your communities so that you can better prepare.
Okay, so we have 2 upcoming episodes, My Church and My Community.
Correct.
That's very exciting. We're getting into the steps already, and we hope our viewers, some of you may be jotting things down, and don't worry, this is uploaded on Facebook, also on YouTube, so you can go and check and repeat it. Now, also, you can watch this together with your church members or as you have mentioned, or other organizations that would like to be disaster ready.
Can I also add, Chantal, that in our, hopefully when we do the final edit, we will have our contact numbers, email addresses. So we would like to encourage our viewers to give us some feedback, connect with us, and we hope to have a manual out by 2024 January, a manual that anyone could pick up and follow this. So this is actually the TV program itself is going to complement what is in the manual.
Oh, yes, because aside from the TV program, we actually have face-to-face workshops on disaster, which you have been doing in Australia and we have been doing here in the Philippines. And then imagine like a world, like disaster-ready churches around the world. And when the next big thing comes, and we're not saying we're praying for it, but it will actually really come, then we will be prepared, not just prepared being safe and all of that, but we'll be prepared to serve our community members, a relevant church. Okay. Now, as before we go, I think we have a couple of times, one takeaway during this discussion or something you'd like to remind our viewers that are watching right now. Let's start with KJ.
We have a church family that is really important to us and gives us a lot of resilience, those connections, with each other. And so we're so grateful that we can connect, with other countries as well, but also locally. If you If there's one thing you can do, it's reach out and connect with those people in your church and join the journey with them together.
Oh, that's nice.
Well, let's remember that acts of God is not destruction or death, but acts of love.
Acts of love are, yes.
Well, I have a message to the youth.
Okay.
Actually, right? I want to encourage the youth to get involved in this, no matter what faith group you're in, but this specific to the Adventist Church. And I want to say, have fun doing it, right? Get together as a youth group, talk about it, understand why you're doing it, follow the episodes. You can do it once a week. And then the church that you worship, the place of worship becomes something very relevant to you, where you're not only coming to worship to get something, but you're also coming with your skills, your talents to contribute. So even though disasters are really sad events, you can actually have a lot of fun preparing for it, right? So you don't forget to be relaxed about it, to have fun as a group, to work hard towards being ready.
Okay, thank you very much. And mine also, maybe somebody's watching here right now and accidentally watched this episode and you're asking yourself, why was I born? Or what's the meaning or purpose of my life? And if I would like to talk to you personally, invite you to sit down and study and discover this journey with all of us that's here. I mean, we may be on TV, but we can be like as friends and your team. And maybe this will give you something to look forward. Maybe this is God talking to you that, hey, you're here for a purpose. And not just like finding purpose and meaning, but this can actually give you also, I'd say it, happiness. Because people who spend time looking after others or people who give their lives in service to others, they're the people, it's scientific, they're people who, and biblical, who actually find true happiness. And that's what we're trying to offer here also. Be involved in this, and in the process, you will see meaning, purpose, and joy and happiness. And look at us, we're smiling, right? Are we happy? Thank you everyone for tuning in for today's episode, today's topic. We'd like to thank KJ, thank Prabhu and Shaina for this fruitful discussion. And please, on the next episode, watch out. We'll be talking about my church and my community. So stay tuned to watch the next episode only here on
Adra TV.